In 1971, while the rest of the world was still feeding punch cards into room-sized machines and waiting days for results, one small nation was building something that had never existed before: a real-time nervous system for an entire economy. There were futuristic swivel chairs. There were geometric data screens. There was an algorithm designed to predict economic crises before they happened. And there was a room, a single extraordinary room, that looked like it belonged on a science fiction television set, not in a government building in South America. This is the forgotten story of Project Cybersyn, and I promise you, you have never heard anything quite like it. Let us step back to September 4th, 1970. Salvador Allende has just won the Chilean presidential election, becoming the first democratically elected Marxist leader in Latin American history. His government moves quickly. Copper mines, banks, factories, all nationalized in rapid succession. But here is the problem that almost no one talks about. When you nationalize dozens of major industries almost overnight, you have suddenly inherited an enormous management crisis. How do you coordinate the output of an entire national economy in real time without drowning in paperwork, bureaucratic delay, and cascading inefficiencies? The answer would come from the most unlikely of sources: a heavy-set British management consultant with a philosopher's mind and an engineer's instincts. His name was Stafford Beer. Beer was a cybernetician, a scientist who studied control and communication in complex systems, from biological nervous systems to entire corporations. Fernando Flores, the technical director of Chile's State Development Corporation, had been corresponding with Beer about applying these ideas to actual governance. On November 4th, 1971, the first anniversary of Allende's election, Beer arrived in Santiago. The experiment that would change how we think about technology and power was about to begin. Now here is where the ingenuity becomes almost breathtaking. Chile had almost no computing infrastructure. The entire project had access to exactly one mainframe computer, a single IBM 36050, running around the clock 7 days a week. Most people would have stopped right there. Beer's team did not stop. Instead, they looked at what already existed across Chile's factories, roughly 500 telex machines, largely sitting idle, gathering dust. They repurposed every one of them. Those 500 machines became Cybernet, a national data grid linking factories across the country directly to Santiago. Factory managers transmitted daily production figures in real time. It was not the internet, but it was the same fundamental idea built decades before the internet arrived. That data fed into a piece of custom software called Cyberstride, which was designed to detect statistical anomalies and flag production problems before they could spiral out of control. If a factory's output dropped outside its normal range, an alert would trigger. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Running alongside Cyberstride was a simulator called CHECO, short for Chilean economy, which modeled the entire national economy in a virtual environment. Planners could test a policy decision in simulation before implementing it in the real world. And underpinning all of it was Beer's viable system model, a philosophy that gave workers genuine autonomy at the local level, while providing the government with the oversight it needed.
This was emphatically not Soviet-style central planning. It was something far more radical and far more sophisticated. But the soul of the project, the piece that captures the imagination every time, was the Opsroom, designed by industrial designer Guy Bonspe. This room looked like nothing that had ever appeared inside a government building. 7 ergonomic wicker armchairs, were arranged in a semicircle, facing large geometric screens displaying real-time data visualizations.
There were no keyboards. And here is the detail I find most remarkable of all. There were no tables, not a single one. Beer banned them deliberately. His reasoning was precise and radical. Tables encourage paper shuffling, and paper shuffling is the enemy of speed. Each armchair had buttons wired through the floor to slide carousels of information projected onto the screens. A decision maker could absorb data and redirect the display without ever leaving their seat. It looked like the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. It functioned like the world's first big data dashboard. President Allende himself visited and sat in one of those chairs, his hand resting on the controls of a system decades ahead of its time. Then came October 1972, and Cybersyn faced its first real test. Right-wing truck owners, approximately 40,000 of them, launched a nationwide strike, funded in part by the CIA, designed to choke the Chilean economy into submission. Roads were blocked. Supply chains collapsed. Cities faced shortages of food, medicine, and fuel. The economic sabotage was devastating. But the government had something the strikers had not anticipated. Using Cybernet, coordinators identified and dispatched roughly 200 truck drivers who remained loyal. Through real-time data routing and rapid logistical coordination, those 200 trucks did the work of thousands. Food moved. Medicine reached hospitals. The strike lasted weeks, but it failed to bring down the government. Cybersyn had passed its only real-world test with extraordinary results. Yet the system existed inside a firestorm it could not survive. Christian democratic opponents warned loudly that Cybernet was a surveillance apparatus in disguise, that the same network monitoring factory production could just as easily monitor the workers themselves. Internationally, the Nixon administration was conducting covert operations to destabilize Allende's government. Declassified CIA documents from the year 2000 confirmed that the agency actively supported efforts to undermine Chilean democracy throughout this period. The tension between idealism and power, between the democratic principles the creators claimed to protect and the fears of those who opposed them, had become impossible to resolve. On September 11, 1973, General Augusto Pinochet launched his military coup. Warplanes bombed La Moneda, the presidential palace. Salvador Allende died inside. Pinochet's soldiers swept through Santiago, and among the things they destroyed was the Opsroom. The screens were shattered. The wicker chairs were gone. The most futuristic room in the developing world was reduced to rubble in a single morning. Fernando Flores, who had become Allende's finance minister, was arrested and spent 3 years in Pinochet's prisons. As for Stafford Beer, he was devastated in a way that never fully healed. He gave away nearly all of his possessions. He dissolved his consultancy. He retreated first to a remote Welsh cottage without electricity, and later lived on a canal boat. He called the Cybersyn years the most meaningful of his life. He never stopped writing about cybernetics until his death in 2002. But ideas, it turns out, are considerably harder to kill than rooms. In 1993, computer scientist Paul Cockshott and economist Alan Cottrell cited Cybersyn directly in their book Towards a New Socialism as a model for computer-managed economic planning. By 2018, academic researchers were drawing explicit parallels between Cybersyn and modern algorithmic governance and big data systems. In 2025, a team of researchers published work titled Other Worlds, Using AI to Revisit Cybersyn and Rethink Economic Futures. The conversation has never stopped. Today, in 2026, Smart cities from Singapore to Toronto are deploying sensor networks, real-time data dashboards, and AI-driven decision engines to manage urban resources at scales Beer could only dream of. And consider this: your modern smartphone carries millions of times more processing power than the single IBM 36050 mainframe that powered Cybersyn's entire national early warning system. The hardware gap that once made Beer's vision seem impossible has completely closed. One artifact from that era survived. A single original Opsroom wicker command chair was preserved, and today it sits behind glass at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. The chair that once occupied the most advanced command center in the developing world, now displayed as a piece of art. I cannot think of a more haunting metaphor for the future that was imagined, built, and then deliberately erased. The question that Project Cybersyn raised in 1971 is the defining political question of our era. Who controls the data? Who benefits from the analysis? Who gets to sit in the chair and press the button? Chile asked it first. We are still answering it. History, as I always say, is not merely a record of what happened. It is a map of the choices we are still making. If today's story moved you, I warmly invite you to share your thoughts below and to keep exploring history with me.